Ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited today to have this guy's does it all. He's just magnificent. James Fallows he's a longtime book and magazine writer, and also and relevant for this discussion, which is going to be about air safety and about a number of other things. Uh, he's a private pilot. He writes frequently about aviation and aviation safety. He's written 12 books. That's twice as many as I have, James. Free Concern
You,
Aviation, Free Flight, published in '01, China Airborne, published in 12, after he had reported from China for 4 years, and Our Towns, published in 2018, now this is really cool, based on a multi-year reporting trip. He and his wife, Deborah Fallows, who grew up in Ohio, in Vermilion, which is really awesome, is also a writer. So they went to small communities all across the U.S. I actually knew about that, James, but I did not know that it was you. And of course, the book was a basis for a 2002 movie still available on HBO Max called Our Towns. But the other thing is, he's a big time Substack writer and has a big following. What is the name of that Substack, James, if you would?
well, Governor, thanks so much for asking, and I send wishes from my Buckeye native wife to you. So mine is called Breaking the News, and I started writing about 3 or 4 years ago. That's the name of a book that I published 30 years ago, warning back in the 1990s that if the media didn't clean up its act, it was liable in danger of losing public trust, and that was back then.
Wow. And you're such a nice guy. I mean, it's my job to kind of judge people quickly. That's what I've always done. And you are such a nice man. Here's one of the cool things. Now, this is really interesting. In your mid 20s, you were a speechwriter for Jimmy Carter. Can you tell me about that? Would you?
Yes. So I'll tell you the story in brief. My wife and I, again, the Ohio girl and I, we met in college when we were 18,
Where did you
and we've been
go?
together. We both went to Harvard. We were both small town
Oh,
kids
couldn't
from
get into
Vermilion.
Ohio State, huh? Okay, I
That
understand.
that that is
Yeah.
true. Things
Yeah.
were tough all over.
Yeah.
So it was the first time I had ever seen snow. I grew up in the Mojave Desert in California. I'd never seen snow before. I thought, my God, people live this way. They come back for another year. But Deb and I got together on a blind date when we were 18. We got married when we were 21. And when I was in graduate school in England, I came back to the US, worked for a magazine you may recall called the Washington Monthly,
Oh,
run by
yeah, of
Charlie
course.
Peters, who is a
Yeah.
great pioneer of sort of reality-based political coverage. I did that for 2 years, and then Deb wanted to go to graduate school in linguistics, and we went to Austin for the University of Texas. And I had no job. And the first job I could find was working as an aide to Lloyd Doggett, whom you know,
Oh,
who was
I
then
know
a
who. Yeah.
26-year-old state senator in the Texas State Senate. I worked for him for a little while. I worked for the Texas Monthly for a little while, but I had no job. And some friends who were working for the Carter campaign in early 1976 said, we need some people to grind out press releases and all the rest. So I joined them. I had nothing better to do. I was in the campaign. I then stayed on in the White House and for 2 years was his head speechwriter. And speech writing is a good thing to have done. It's less enjoyable actually to do, but I had a tremendous respect for President Carter, of course.
Well, tell me why was it so much more difficult to be a speechwriter than to say I once was one?
So
What's behind that, James?
um, I will ask you, how many speechwriters have you employed in your Ohio and U.S. Capitol time?
I've never had a speechwriter.
Aha. Well, that is the ideal way
I've
to
never
do
had
it.
it. I mean, I used to have to do a big speech once a year as governor, called the State of the State address. And by the way, you'll find this interesting. Um, the first one I delivered in the state capitol, and then all the rest of them, the next seven, I delivered in different parts of Ohio.
Ah,
And I did one, I think, right up near Vermilion. I did one right up there, and it was really fun. Now I would kind of write that thing out, and then I would practice it a couple times and have some people that would listen, and they will all tell me how good it was, whether it was or wasn't. But no, once in a while they tell me. But I just did all my own stuff, and I think that was good. I mean, I've always liked that, and I considered that to be a real plus. But what was
yes.
it like for you to be with him? Because he's really a magnificent man, right?
Yes, yes. As it was a blessing for Jimmy Carter. I'll give you my brief 30-second Jimmy Carter riff, then I'll tell you about speech writing. That he was a person who was both lucky and then unlucky, and then very lucky again. He was lucky to have become president in the first place. He still, 1 year before he was sworn in, his name recognition was 1% in the
Yep.
US. There still never has been anything as rapid as that. And he caught the magic of that moment in a way that Ronald Reagan did 4 years later, running against Carter, in a way that Barack Obama did, that way certain people do at certain times. He had Bob Dylan supporting him. He had the Allman Brothers. He had Martin Luther King Sr. was supporting him. So he was very lucky in the circumstances of his becoming president. He was unlucky in all the ways we know, from the Iranian hostage situation and the raid. The prime interest rate the year he ran for reelection
Yeah.
was 20%. Teddy Kennedy ran against him, et cetera. But then he was lucky to have then almost 44 years as ex-president to sort of show the world what kind of person he was and to get the Nobel Peace Prize deservedly. Like you, he's a former governor, and like anybody who is intellectually proud, he sort of resented the idea of speechwriters at all. That he thought why, if these people were so good at writing speeches, they would be president now, et cetera. But there's simply a volume issue when you're either running for president, as you
That's
know,
right. That's right.
or if you're being president, you just got to
Yeah.
put out all this stuff. It's
That's right.
National Lupus Day.
Yeah.
It's, the National Day of Congo or whatever. You have to
Yeah.
put out stuff. So that was why it was not always easy to do things for him, but I respected him enormously.
Well, it's interesting because the way I do things, and I have I mean, we're on Substack. So, the way it occurs to me is something pops into my head. And so I just want to go and do it. And most of the
Yep.
time I can do it verbally. It's almost, I always think about it like a songwriter. I mean, I want to compare myself to a songwriter, but when the tune's in your head, you got to put it down, right? And when the thought is in your head about something you want to say, you got to figure out how to say it. I mean, you could write it down, but you really need to say it. I think what do you think about that, James? I mean,
Oh,
it's like, for example, I did this really unusual video about Norman Podhoretz, who was a great
yep.
writer and spiritually inclined in many ways. And I saw the book on the shelf. I thought he just died. Well, I'll just say something about Podhoretz. If I'd have written it down or waited, I wouldn't have done it. And it just, you have to, I know a lot of people don't understand that. When things pop into your head, you got to do it. Does that make sense to you?
So you're the only person with whom I've ever had this discussion because you are uniquely positioned of having from the offices you've held. I find, quote, real writing, like books or magazine articles, to be difficult. You have to sort of type there, you do many drafts.
Right.
I find speech writing to be easy because you just say it to yourself. You just start talking it out and typing it down, very much as you're saying. And I think people who are effective political communicators, as you have been and are, you just start saying it to yourself. And you have writers, so speech writers who match their principle, they're able to sort of say it to themselves the way their principal would be saying it if he or she had the time. So,
Well, it's
um,
very interesting.
you,
What a profession and what pressure to write a
yes.
big talk, a big speech for a president of the United States. James, so you are a safety expert, but you're many different things. But here's the interesting thing. I was flying, I think it was into DC about a week ago, and I got off the plane and I looked at the control tower and I thought, no, in fact, I was going into Florida. Nobody's talking about it anymore. It's like we had this big crisis with all these air traffic controllers, and then one day it's like it. How did it? It's like the crisis just disappeared. It was like snow in the a snowstorm in the middle of the spring was here then gone. Explain that to me.
So it is amazing. Over the now 30 years or so that I've been an active private pilot, um, both Deb, my Ohio girl wife, and I have come really to respect the whole culture of aviation safety and in particular of air traffic controllers, people who everybody in the aviation system, from the pilots to the cabin crews, the people who are telling you to fasten your seatbelts, to the maintenance people, to the air traffic controllers, to the people who are loading the bags, they all have a sense that they personally are responsible for if something goes wrong. It could be traced back to them. And so there's a kind of collective accountability and collective responsibility that you don't find in most other lines of work. And when I did a piece when the government shutdown of a month or two ago was starting, saying that this is not going to make air travel more dangerous. It's going to make it slower because the way this system responds to any kind of disruption or pressure is to slow things down. There's an old pilot saying that the first thing you do when something goes wrong in the sky is to wind your watch. That's back when people had watches because you don't want to panic. You want to take some time and say, okay, how to sort this out. So you're seeing the results of air traffic controllers and the whole system taking a little bit more time, spacing the planes out further, giving more margin. And it was so I think that's mainly it's a tribute to the entire system, which sets an example in shared accountability, shared pride for everything else we do.
So, but you see these crews, the flight attendants are coming in at one point, the pilots come in another. Uh, but you say though they operate really as a team. Are they trained as a team?
So, yes, they have very different roles. And for example, it's sometimes the case. So, people think there is a pilot and a co-pilot. In fact, there are two pilots up there. The one who sits in the left-hand seat and has four epaulets on his or her sleeve, that's the captain. And the one who sits in the right-hand seat with three epaulets on his or her shoulder is the first officer. But they're both trained pilots. It's sometimes the case that these two people might not have met each other until they get in the cockpit for that flight. That they have different schedules. It's if you can imagine the chaos of scheduling all the flights. It's also the case for the cabin crew, all the flight attendants, et cetera. Sometimes they're a unit, sometimes they're meeting each other for the first time, but they've all been trained in these roles and these responsibilities and what to do in emergency. And so it's while you see cases of ones who get along better or worse, people are temperamental, it is like the best parts of the U.S. military in the terms of people knowing their job and having to sort of live up to that level. So they're trained both individually and as a team. And I feel the safest thing Americans can do is to be on an airline flight.
That's very interesting. Speaking of flight attendants, there's a story that I think it was Shaq was on an airplane and he was not buckled up. And the flight attendant came by and said, "Excuse me, sir, but you're not buckled." And he said, "Well, Superman don't need no buckle." And the flight attendant looked and said, "Superman don't need no plane."
That's
So let me go back to these people in these control towers. They don't make a lot of money, do they?
they
Relatively
make
thinking.
it's a compared to what question. I think that
Yeah.
it's recognized as a skilled profession, and so the ones who have been senior, they have a mandatory retirement age, which is in the mid 50s someplace. And by the time they've had a career that they're making over $100,000, they're making in this sort of low $100,000 range. So it's not financial world money, but it's also not minimum wage money. It's not like TSA people who are
Right.
very poorly paid. So air traffic controllers, it's not so much the pay they complain about, it's the unpredictability of the working hours. We'll have a midnight to 6 a.m. shift, then 3 days later they'll have a 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. shift. And that is really hard because they need to, managing their sleep, managing their attention, managing the sort of second by second stress. And can I give you one other little known
Oh,
fact about all
yes,
this?
sir.
So I think people in general think that if air traffic controllers fell asleep or if the towers went dark, that planes would be crashing into each other. And basically, that's not really the problem. What a pilot sees, and as I'm sure you've seen in the cockpit, is basically the sky is empty except on the approach to National Airport or to Columbus or to SFO or whatever. Then it's crowded. Then it's like getting onto a freeway. And the rest of the time, planes are many, many miles apart. And so what the air traffic controller is doing is having the 3D chess vision of 2 minutes from now, where's this plane going to be and where's that plane going to be? How do I sequence them for altitude and for landing them as frequently as possible, but not too frequently? And so it's the air traffic controllers. It's that the only part of the sky that is crowded is the approach lanes into and out of airports, and that is their domain where they really are,
Well, I
responsible for
mean, that
safety.
sounds to me like such a stressful situation. Is it stressful to them? And why does it work so well?
So I think it must. I've never obviously done this work myself. I've been in some control towers, both in the US and in China. And interestingly, in China, they trust the air traffic controllers so much less than in the US that literally they have 5 times as much separation between planes as in the US. The US ones are so expert they can have them land
Right.
every minute. In China, it's every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes. So it is certainly said to be very stressful, and the controllers are relieved regularly, like every half hour or so, somebody else will take the controls. Um, I think that it has been in the last few years, there have been staffing shortages and more pressure. Um, I'll say one other thing here. You would recall the era of airline deregulation, which Jimmy
Oh yeah,
Carter
of
brought
course.
in the
Right.
1970s, along with craft beer deregulation. I wrote some of those deregulatory orders in both beer and aviation,
And
just
trucks.
as
On
and
trucks. Yeah.
trucks, yes. And so we've had sort of the perfection of deregulated airline flight, which is, in real terms, tickets are about one-third the cost of what they were, 50 years ago. Many more people fly, et cetera. But everything now is crowded just about to the limit, which is how many runways there are at big airports. That National Airport cannot land planes any more frequently than it does now, nor Dulles, nor LAX. And so it's managing that sort of it's like a freeway. Freeways have as many cars as they're ever going to have. And that's what makes it hard. What makes it good, I think, exceptionally, is the training for air traffic controllers to get calmer and calmer the tenser and tenser things become. And you can hear it in their voices. They slow
Wow.
down, they get calm as things are getting more dangerous.
Jim, when an air traffic like I'm familiar a lot with like troopers, state troopers, okay? One day a state trooper is a state trooper, and the next day the state trooper, he or she takes the uniform off, and there's an adjustment period. I mean, because you're not what you were. It's almost like being a former elected official. One day you are, and the next day, they kick you around. I mean, not that you didn't get kicked around when you were in, but let's talk about the life of an air traffic controller or a military pilot, that kind of thing with the adrenaline rush and everything. So when you leave that job as a controller, is it a tough adjustment period for you?
That's a very interesting question. And from the ones I know, I think they, like members of the Marine Corps, being a controller is something that is a lifetime title. That they are controllers and they're not active controllers anymore. And they recognize there's a certain kind of outlook and skill and view of the world that they have. One of them I know, who was actually head of the Air Traffic Controllers Union for a while, is now a professional photographer, and he loves doing that. Others are. It's a very interesting question you ask, and I'll try to ask. I don't know whether there's a pattern. I know that for airline pilots, there's now, I think, a mandatory age 65 retirement time for them. Many of them become like private pilots after their or for corporate jets or whatever, because there's and even I think freight lines like FedEx, I believe they have no mandatory age requirement there, because again, having a pilot certificate is a lifetime thing. I am and will always be a pilot, but you have to keep being recertified to
Right.
exercise the privileges of the certificate. So that's a good question, which I will ask. You could be a
Um,
journalist.
Jim, so when you look at these young guys getting on these planes, and they're sort of like a starter plane, is what, the way I kind of think about it.
Yes.
They don't have a lot of experience and they don't make a lot of money. Are they, with a lot of, I mean, there's probably so many questions people would like to ask, but are they safe enough as pilots? They don't make much money. They fly these bucket ships around, right? I mean, talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So I think that you're right. There is a sort of an apprenticeship that works in piloting. If any of your listeners or viewers are going to flight schools themselves, as they all should, everybody should learn to fly an airplane. It's one of the great experiences in life. There are people who are building hours. Your flight instructors will usually be in their mid
Right.
20s or their late 60s and upwards. That they're building hours or they're post some kind of military or airline career, and they're sharing their wisdom. I've had both kinds of instructors, young and older, and the young ones are building hours, and they have all the virtues of youth, of quick reflexes and being alert and all that. And they typically build, let's say, 1,000 or 1,500 flight hours as instructors or things. Then they have regional airlines where they'll work and they'll get up to the commercials, the big airlines. I feel safe with young and old pilots, and the numbers are in my just because the standards are so high, and the numbers are in our favor. We know this terrible accident that happened earlier this year over the Potomac, where around 70 people were
Right.
killed. It's worth recognizing, number one, more people were killed in car crashes that day than were killed over the Potomac. And that was the first fatal airline crash in what, 15, 18 years or something in the US. And that of the over the last, there are about 1 billion passenger flights per day in the US. And we've gone like 15 years between fatal crashes. So on the teamwork, the standards, the training, the accountability make me think I'm not more comfortable in seat 23F than I am in my normal chair, but I'm safer than when I'm in a car.
It's so interesting you say it because just a couple days ago, I did sort of my first longish trip in my autonomous Tesla.
Uh,
Okay. And I'm in this car. It's just amazing. And I'm talking to some of my friends who have done this regularly. Well, what if this happens or what if that happens? And they say, well, that's going to react better than you are. It's going to react faster with 12 cameras and and you don't always got to watch and all that because there's glitches. Yeah, 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 yeah. But they're like, yeah, this is and so I've got to tell you, it's it's really amazing. It is really amazing. And I think it's going to, just like the airline industry has improved so much, I think we're going to see fewer deaths in the auto industry when people adjust to it. But I think people have a hard time doing it.
Yes, and that's a what yet another fascinating thing you're saying from my point of view. So I have been in Waymos. I've been in a Waymo in
Yes,
Phoenix and in LA where it's completely there's no passenger there.
right.
My wife and I have a Tesla which has this full self-driving capability, which I, sitting right now in Washington, D.C., am still afraid of because there's little streets here and people pop out of nowhere and a deer comes out in the street and a kid runs out with a ball and I still have been afraid to turn, freeway, that's fine. But the little streets of DC that you know so well, I still think, uh-uh. Would you
See,
drive in your car in
James,
DC?
it's interesting, and I wouldn't want to be in a debate and take the affirmative side. But like that kid crossing the street, and I know Waymo's had its problems. It's a little different than Tesla.
Yeah.
But I wonder if those 12 cameras are going to do a much better job of seeing that I am in an area where we're at dusk or
Yes.
dark. But anyway, it's interesting. Okay, two other areas I want to ask about this before I talk about your travel through America. The cost of airlines. Is it going to continue to go up? I mean, what's the future of that?
So the cost of airlines has been like other phenomena in the US where it's gotten both cheaper and more expensive at the same time. That if you take the median dollar per flight mile of now compared to 50 years ago when deregulation and even 20 years ago, it keeps going down and down. That's, the budget airlines pioneered this, Southwest, many others did. So it's still for as a commodity, it's getting cheaper and cheaper, and planes get more and more efficient with gasoline and everything. Fuel price is a
Right.
huge variable here. But then the gap between seat 92F and seat 1A is bigger than ever before. And airlines make all of their money from the first, 10 rows of seats, from first class and business class. So that's where they make all their money. And so I think we're going to see that delta as in many other things in the U.S. life, continue to increase. I think fuel is the main sort of unknown. When the price of oil goes up, so do airline fares, and airline profits go down. So I think if you're willing to put up with the tiny seat, then you can be able to do things
I'm
for
going to get to
a
the
limited
seat,
amount of money.
but there are now these thoughts about regional airplanes that will do your shorter leg that will be run by battery with a
Yes,
fuel backup system.
yes,
And I don't think it's just not happened yet, but I got to think I know it's going to happen. I know somebody in that business. And so if you take
yes.
Columbus to Indianapolis, you would have the battery and the fuel backup, sort of like a hybrid car, right?
I agree entirely. And I wrote a book, one of those books you mentioned graciously was a Free Flight, which came out in the almost 25 years ago. It was about the fact that the U.S. has 5,000 airports where planes can land, but about half the traffic goes through just 15 airports, all the big hubs, Denver and Atlanta and all the rest. So being able to have the point-to-point travel, if you go from Columbus to Lorain, Columbus to Indianapolis, that would be much more practical and efficient. And I think the battery revolution is really coming. There's a company called Beta in Burlington, Vermont. There's a company called Joby in California. There's a number of the rest,
Joby, yeah,
which are
that's one I've heard
yes.
of. Yes.
So I think this over the next decade we'll see this become more and more practical. First for freight and delivery, then for people. So I think this is a an area for optimism.
Okay, so now most of the time it's okay, but sometimes I will get in the seat and it will be so small, and my knees will be right up against, okay, the front. And I mean, do they really have to do that?
I guess if they can cram one more row in there. I don't recall how tall Shaq is, but he's a
He's about
giant.
7 foot tall.
There was a at my in my prime I was 6'2". I'm now 6'1". It is the something I will pay money for is the exit row in an airline, just
Oh,
because,
I
as you
agree
know,
with you. The exit row. We love the exit
we
row.
love the exit row.
We love the exit row. And it's Southwest. Have you a little secret here? We're running out of time here with the calendar. But it doesn't matter. It's really interesting how late you get on that airplane. It seems like, well, if I'm in the very back of A or the beginning of B, I used to panic about the exit row. It's amazing how many people will not sit in the exit row. The
Yes.
last flight I was on, it was A47, and there were like 4 different seats available in the exit row. People just not like it, or what do you think that is?
I don't know, but I thank Providence every time I find a seat there. And we are in lifetime servitude to United Airlines. So we lived in China. We got a million miles with them.
Right.
So we can always get the exit row in United. That's why we can't fly any other airline because we can get the exit row there.
Oh, it's so great. And you get, with Southwest, I get on, I have a little Wi-Fi, I watch a little movie that I would never have watched, and then the
Yes.
next thing I know, I'm there. So, all right, so small town. Was that the name of that thing
So,
you were
so our
doing?
book was called Our Towns, and
Our
the movie on
towns.
HBO, and we spent almost 8 years, about half our time over 8 years, flying around our little propeller plane to smaller town America, essentially saying places that would not normally be in the news unless there was a tornado or a
Right.
tragedy or the Iowa caucuses, and essentially treating them as real places. And how did people work together? And the bottom line was you feel a lot better about the U.S. at the local level than you do if you are watching cable news. And there's still a lot more sort of reasonableness and cooperation and future orientation and good nature at most of America most of the time.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
That's a question we wrestled with a lot, and I think it's partly, as you well know, that there's become an industry of polarization at the national level, both for politics and for the media. And at the local level, still people still trust their local news sources, endangered and embattled as those sources are. And people still, you're going to see your neighbor the next day. And if we looked at most of the places we went, we asked who makes this town go, whether it's Charleston, West Virginia, or Yakima, Washington, or
Yeah.
Fresno, California, and if there was some answer to that question, whether it was a teacher or a librarian or a mayor or whatever, that meant there was something there if people cared about it as more than just a place to live. So I think there's still what Tocqueville found 200 plus years ago, we still found.
Uh, do you think, Jim, that this whole issue of shared faith? I was told you I did this thing with
Yep.
Norman Podhoretz. I mean, I just did I guess what you call a sort of a essay about him, that he wrote, or I wrote after reading his book, that it's faith in God that defines all values and all mores really come from God for those that believe, and for those who are the no's, they just don't think there are any rules or
Yeah.
values, is what I took from the book. I don't want to misquote
Yep.
Podhoretz, but did you find there was a stream of faith in these small communities where that created a sense of obligation?
Um, Yes, and yes, there are many communities where faith, as we think of it in the organized sense, was a big driver of citizen engagement and of, for example, spent a lot of time in South Dakota. And throughout South Dakota, it was faith organizations, both Catholic charities and Lutheran social services, that played the main role in integrating refugees and immigrants. And so that's a longstanding tradition in U.S. life. I think what we found, and I should say, our linear family I was raised as a Protestant. My wife was raised as a very strict Catholic. One of our sons is raising his family as Jewish. We have another family that's very sort of conservative Protestant. We have another part of our family that is just kind of pagan, you know, earth worship. So we encompass multitudes. And I think believing in something that makes you think you have some duty of kindness and of empathy, it can be a big organizing tool, as it is many places, and an individually decency making tool to think there, but for the grace of God, go I.
Well, I just finished a book called Heaven Help Us, and it is about the power of churches, synagogues, and mosques
Yeah.
to be able to get people to launch social movements to fix many of the social ills, whether it's the homeless, the lonely, uh, any of these issues. I selfishly am plugging this to you, so you will tell
Yes.
somebody about
Good.
it.
Well,
But to make a
you've
long
got my
story
attention.
short, can we do something like this again? You have just been such a delight, such a delight.
Uh,
And maybe
I
I'll
would
come
love
on your
to.
maybe I'll come on your
Yes.
Substack
Good.
some point,
Yes.
and talk
Well,
about who
come
knows
interview you.
what. And I want to wish you a great holiday. And you give that Vermilion, Ohio wife, that Buckeye wife, my best.
I will do so, Governor. It's a real honor and pleasure to talk to you. I'll look forward to reading your book, inviting
Okay.
you on, and sharing our
Okay.
plans to renew America.
Yes, and let's not forget this. Let's not forget this Substack, Breaking the News with James Fallows. Thanks, James. Happy
Thank you,
holiday.
Governor. Same to you.